It's the final week of the Synod Central. I know you're all so sad, where we're bringing you the latest from the month-long Synod on Synodality in Rome. Joining me is the Papal Posse, editor-in-chief of thecatholicthing.org, Robert Arroyo from Rome, and canon lawyer and priest of the Archdiocese of New York, Father Gerald Murray. Gents, thank you for being here. The draft of the final document was distributed to all the participants at the Synod this week, and in the spirit of transparency, it's not available to the general public and remains confidential, not because of a lack of transparency, but to maintain a positive atmosphere of discussion. Bob, what are you hearing about the contents of the document, and what do you think it'll actually contain?
Yeah, it's very hard to say. In the past, of course, there have been these, sometimes I call it not just a leak, but like a fire hose, but the delegates have been forbidden. They did not receive an electronic copy via email. They've been forbidden to photograph it or copy it. So there is this kind of irony that on the one hand, they're talking about accountability and transparency, and yet they recognize, and I think rightly, that there needs to be some discretion at times when you talk about things. So look, there's going to be the usual talk about women being participants in the church, but without going as far as deaconettes. There's going to be talk about transparency and accountability. There's going to be talk about power sharing and making the church into a missionary church and synodality. But I don't really think there's going to be anything tremendously newsworthy, as much as some people who are behind this would like to be.
Father, does anyone really buy all this confidentiality and secrecy as merely for the sake of a good discussion? Again, the Synod was about dialogue, which literally shut down dialogue, except for those hand-selected by the people running this Synod.
Well, of course, not having access to what they're deliberating means that we're not part of the deliberations, although we get the message that everyone's supposed to be participating. And it's fascinating because what this breeds is side events. You know, we had side events on women's ordination, on homosexuality. We've had press conferences in which women deacons are being pushed by certain members of the Synod. So people are discussing things, but it's all on the sidelines. Why not have this document made public so that the delegates can hear reaction from people out in the trenches? It's all, I have to say, part of a control mechanism which betrays their lack of confidence that people are going to see what's written and say, oh, this is great, we need more of this.
Bob, you wrote a column in thecatholicthing.org that I want to get into. I love this title, The Conciliar Circularity of Synodality. In it, you write, in the end, as we well know from much previous experience, none of this really matters, except in the sense that it has created the impression that the Church no longer knows what to do with itself, that it's groping around in the dark, trying out various ways of dealing with the divisions within, that radical changes are in the offing, or maybe not. It will be up to Pope Francis to make of this mess what he will. Let us pray for him. That's Robert Royal's article, bit of it from October 23rd. Bob, is that really how this thing ends, with a whimper and a shrug?
Yeah, I think so. But what I was getting at with that title is there's actually going to be yet another phase of this that we haven't talked about before. There's going to be a 3-day conference at the Gregorian University that has Cardinal Hollerich and Cardinal Grech and two of the priest secretaries of the Synod managers attending. And they're going to talk about the connection, the circularity over the past 60 years between the church that was proposed at Vatican II and the Church of Synodality. So as I said in that column, what I think they're trying to do is they know that there's not going to be anything that is really consequential coming out of this synodality. And so they're trying to attach it to the heady days of the 70s. And this is like they talked about, is this the mature fruit of the ecclesiology? I think it's just one more kicking the can down the road, because they don't know what kind of deliverables that they can get to that are going to satisfy people. They're not going to get female deacons. They're not going to get LGBT, and all those hot button issues are still going to be out there.
The Vatican also announced this week, with very little coverage, I might add, that they are renewing their secret deal with China. And this allows the CCP input on the appointment of Catholic bishops. Another 4 years of this. This renewal went forward despite the report by the Hudson Institute and our friend Nina Shea over there that at least 7 Catholic bishops in China have been detained without due process, while others are being subjected to pressure, surveillance, and police investigation since the pact was signed 6 years ago. Father, this deal would endure until 2028. Your reaction to the renewal and the Church's silence on the outrage committed against their own bishops and the faithful?
Yeah, this is one of the most regrettable things in my lifetime, to see the Holy See abandon faithful Catholics in order to entrust the selection of bishops to the Communist Party of China. If this model of having governments have a role in the naming of bishops, why is it that we don't do that in all the other countries of the world? We don't do it because the leadership of governments has nothing to do with the naming of bishops, and they shouldn't. The Catholic Church is the mystical body of Christ. Communist operatives and communist leaders should have absolutely nothing to say about who becomes the leader of the flock in China. But the Holy See, regrettably, has surrendered this into the hands of people who are hostile to the Catholic religion. This is an outrage.
Bob, very quickly, your reaction. I mean, there are Catholic bishops approved by the Xi regime at the Synod, and they'll presumably be in the next conclave.
Well, the 2 that are here, I heard the other day that neither of them speaks Italian, or maybe one of them does. One speaks a little bit of English, but neither speaks Italian. So I don't even know how they're participating. Can there be simultaneous translation from Chinese? I just don't know. It's interesting. I think it was almost kind of pathetic in the announcement of the signing of this again. They went through these things that we were just talking about, that there were underground bishops who've been repressed, and the Chinese started a new diocese without consulting with Rome. And the only thing that I think that the Vatican was able to say is that the Chinese rehabilitated a 95-year-old bishop from the underground church, and they made him formally okay again. I mean, this is very sad, and it's very clear that they made a mistake going into this, and they just can't let go of it.
Which brings us to the heroic former Bishop of Hong Kong, Joseph Cardinal Zen. In a blog this week, the 92-year-old prelate issued an appeal for prayer while outlining his fundamental concerns with this synod. We should remind our viewers, Cardinal Zen was one of the 5 cardinals that raised this issue in the form of a dubia with the Pope a few years ago. The cardinal writes this: "I think endless debate should be avoided, at least on the issue of blessing same-sex couples. If this issue is not resolved in the Synod, the future of the Church will be very unclear, because some clergy and friends of the Pope insist on changing the Church tradition in this regard." End quote. Gents, the Cardinal also questioned the gathering's legitimacy as a Synod of bishops, given the inclusion of non-bishop voting members, echoing what Cardinal Mueller said last week. Bob, then Father, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think I mentioned in our last episode that Cardinal Ratzinger, before he became Pope, said that this way of kind of delegating authority to bodies that didn't really have a history in the Church is very dangerous, because it dilutes the real authority in the Church, which is in the Pope and the bishops. And as we keep seeing, this the so-called dilution of this authority actually just leads back to the Holy Father's power without any check among the other bishops. There's been very few people who have kind of raised the fundamental questions the way that Cardinal Zen has about the status of this synod. So, look, I think we're ending up in a mess, and that's why in that column I said it's going to be up to the Pope to clean up this mess, and we'll have to see what he does with it.
Father, your reaction. Cardinal Zen also points the finger at Cardinal Fernandez and those running the Synod as sort of trying to that they're engineering a sort of new vision of the Church.
Well, we've heard paradigm shift in the past, which basically means we got to start over and do things in a new way. But yeah, if synodality now means that the Synod of Bishops is transformed into a meeting of lay people, religious, deacons, priests, bishops, if synodality means that, so my question is, well, why didn't Pope Francis name some lay people and some nuns to the College of Cardinals? I mean, what are we talking about here? Are bishops successors of the apostles who have a role in governance of the Church? Because that's what the Synod of Bishops is. The same with the College of Cardinals. Why is it now that lay people can be in one place but not the other? The logic of synodality is destructive. If it means that lay people have a share in the governance of the church, that's a violation of the nature of the church as established by our divine Savior.
Yeah, there seems to be more confusion and double talk over this issue. Again, we keep hearing it, female deacons, or as Bob mentioned, deaconettes. Just after the DDF head, Cardinal Fernandez, indicated that the issue of the female diaconate was off the table. He's now saying, remember he said this, we know that the Holy Father has expressed that at this time the issue of the female diaconate is not mature, and has asked that we not entertain this possibility for now, okay? That's what he said on the 21st of this month. Then German Bishop Franz Joseph Overbeck countered by saying this at the Vatican press conference this week. Again, he's a synod participant. We must provide a new answer for the role of women in the church. We haven't found the answer to the lack of priests, and unless we change, we will no longer have priests in parishes. Father, what do you make of this back and forth, the mixed messaging that has become routine at this synod? And another German bishop, Georg Betzing, by the way, told synod participants that the question of female deacons will dictate whether women will continue to seek and find their home in the church. Your reaction?
Well, all I can say is if the Pope doesn't want this discussed anymore, why is it being discussed? Why is it being discussed by Cardinal Fernandez and these other bishops? They didn't get the message. No, we're seeing here an elaborate game in which hopes are raised, then dashed, raised again, complainers get outraged, people say, I'm offended, blah, blah, blah. How about we get back to the ground of reality? The Catholic Church does not exist with women deacons. It never has existed in Catholicism. So this is all a game to get women into power in the church. And believe me, as we said before, once you're ordained a deacon, the next demand will be priesthood and then episcopacy. This is all about changing the nature of the structure of the church. So I wish the Pope's wish, as he expressed it, would actually be obeyed by those who are under him.
Bob, any quick reaction to that? The back and forth
Yeah,
on
I mean,
female?
the very term that Cardinal Fernandez used, that it is not mature at this point, that the question is not mature. In other words, that it's still green. The fruit might come in later. That actually directly contradicts what the Holy Father said to Norah O'Donnell in that famous TV interview. He just said that the Lord set it up this way that women cannot be part of the ordained ministry of the church. So what they're going to do is they're going to set up, we've been saying this, for years now on this show, they're going to have a kind of a parallel process that they hope for, or at least some people further down the line hope will kind of mature into, if not actually the ordaining ministry, something so close to it that you won't be able to tell when you go into church on a Sunday morning.
Before we run out of time, there are a couple of other stories we have to get to here. There's a scandal continuing to brew over the Vatican's role, and more specifically, Pope Francis's role in the recent attempt to reinstate a former priest, a priest who was twice convicted of sexually abusing minors in Argentina. An interview with the Vatican's leading canonist seems to suggest that Pope Francis may be personally involved. Father, as a canonist yourself, you've been monitoring this story. Tell us what we need to know.
Yeah, a priest was accused of sexual abuse of minors at religious services. He was tried and found guilty. The doctrine of the faith gave the diocese the right to hold a trial. He was found guilty. Second trial was, an appeal trial was held, found guilty again. Then suddenly, Archbishop Parapena, who was one of the officials in the Secretary of State, issued a decree saying that he's now restored to the priesthood because new evidence came in. And then a couple of days later, the bishop in charge of the doctrine of the faith of sex abuse cases said, that decree is null and void. That man has no competence to make this decision. So what's happening here is, after any trial in the church and the matter is adjudicated, the person who is convicted can make a personal appeal to the Pope and ask for the grace and mercy and favor of having the verdict set aside. That's the only process that exists legally, and it's not really a legal institution in the sense of being regulated by a trial or having an administrative process. Simply, you write to the Pope and you say, please take this penalty away. So the penalty allegedly was taken away by, according to Pedro Parapena, following some kind of extraordinary process. Well, we need more details, because how did this arrive in the Vatican? Was it appeal to the Pope? What was the new evidence? Why was he found by Parapena to be innocent now of the serious charge? Because they said he was guilty of recklessness. What is this? This is chaos. Canon law is becoming meaningless in the church when things like this happen. And I thank it's Archbishop Kennedy in the Doctrine of the Faith, because he upheld the law.
Yeah, and that's what I wanted to make that clear. Archbishop Kennedy, who's at the Doctrine of Faith, came in and invalidated that restoration to the priesthood, seemingly overturning the Pope's decision. Bob, once again, we journalists look at optics. What are the optics of yet another case where, again, allegedly, we don't know exactly, but clearly only the Pope has this authority, he may have been involved in defending a convicted abuser?
Yeah, from what I can gather from the various reports, this person was a friend of Cardinal Fernandez's from Argentina, and he may be known to the Pope. We don't know about that. And let's just, for the sake of our audience, what this would amount to is sort of like a presidential pardon in the United States. So it goes entirely outside the normal legal system that Father was talking about. And look, you can do that in specific cases. But I think, as Father has often said, you need some kind of public explanation for this, because this guy is accused of very serious abuses against underage people. It went through what seems to be very good, normal judicial channels within the church, and suddenly from on high, he gets this presidential pardon, of this papal pardon, if you want to put it that way. So this is not transparency, it is not accountability, and it's certainly, given how grave the damage to the church has been around the world because of these abuse cases, this is not, to use your term, the optics that we want to have if we want to give the impression that we've moved past that terrible period.
Yeah. Well, and I thought the law had changed, Father. I thought the Pope had just instituted new canons, new legislative texts that if you're found guilty of abusing a minor or any sexual abuse, I thought it was instant excommunication. Wasn't that the story? Or certainly out of the priesthood.
No, the penalty for removal of the priesthood is applicable here, and that was what was applied. And the mysterious thing, of course, is Parapena, Archbishop Parapena says this man was guilty of reckless behavior. Now, wait a minute. He was found guilty of the most grave offenses against minors involving sexual abuse. Reckless behavior, that's not a sufficient answer. What was the evidence? Why was this decreed? Who decreed it? At whose behest? These are all questions that need to be answered, because based on what we know, only Pope Francis can receive a petition for a grace and pardon after a judicial sentence has been passed and then reconfirmed in a second court.
Okay, I've got a minute and a half. I've got to hit this story. It's really interesting. There will be one fewer cardinal elevated at the next consistory in December. One of the cardinals elect, a 62-year-old Indonesian bishop, Pascalis Suor, was asked not to be created a cardinal. He's telling the Holy Father, I don't want to be made a cardinal because he has a desire to grow further in his priestly life, service to the church and God's people. Bob, very quickly, what's at play here?
Well, we're hearing rumors that he has a family, and you don't want to condemn someone on the basis of rumors that appear in newspapers. We know that these things can very often be misleading, but it wouldn't surprise me, because we've seen over and over again that there hasn't been really a systematic review and a careful. When you're going to appoint someone to a major position like being a cardinal, there's not that's sort of like the background checks that you really want to have with many of these people. So, look, I hope it's not true, but the excuse he's given doesn't seem plausible.
Yeah, no, it's an odd story. Before we go, Father, and you can comment on this as well, but I've got to read this to you. Cardinal Fernandez of the Vatican Doctrinal Office issued a report to the Synod that encapsulates so much of what we've been talking about here. The report says the following, quote, only a vital, fruitful, and reciprocal tension between doctrine and practice embodies the living tradition and is able to counteract the temptation to rely on the barren scleratism of verbal pronouncements. Father, First of all, I guess he means rigidity by sclerotic. Your thoughts here on what this means. Is this about using practice as a battering ram to basically throw off rigid tradition?
Well, when you start saying that there's tension between the Church's tradition and her practice and her teaching, I get very nervous because, as a matter of fact, in the Catholic faith, the doctrine and the practice are in a unity and a harmony, and they support one another. Tensions arise when heresies are introduced in the life of the Church and people start to claim that the faith is otherwise than what it is. We're dealing here with a whole culture and phenomenon, as Bob said earlier, where teachings of the Church are put on trial, where everything becomes provisional, everybody's nervous, what's coming next. And in the end, we're basically reduced to saying, well, what are they going to say tomorrow? Because today I believe this, but maybe they're going to say something tomorrow. That's impossible in the Catholic Church, but it's happening on the level of these discussions. You know, Cardinal Fernandez is supposed to be the one who confirms the people in the doctrine of the faith. And he's more or less saying the doctrine of the faith is always something that's under tension, and therefore we have to kind of like stand by and wait and see where the fight ends up. And that's not what it is.
Well, the tell to me, and we've discussed this so many times on this show and in our segment, this idea that practice can be quickly revised so that the doctrine has to catch up. Just change the practice and we'll just change the words later. This is a real problem and a danger and a threat. And I was stunned when I read it from his own pen. That's a tell. And I think we all have to be very wary of that and watch it closely in the days ahead. Gentlemen, we will leave it there. Thanks for keeping us up to date on all the Synod doings. For commentary by Robert Royal and Father Gerald Murray, visit thecatholicthing.org. And don't worry, we'll be keeping you updated on the ongoing post-Synod study group discussions. More soon. Thank you, gentlemen.